Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the briancrombieradiohour on Saga 960. Mental health during COVID-19 has been a real issue, and I want to introduce you to Paula Allen, who is the global leader and senior vice president of research and total well-being at Lifeworks. And she's going to talk tonight about mental health and COVID-19. Her work leverages data to understand trends and effective strategies in all aspects of health and well-being with a practical focus on workforce mental health. She's got over 20 years of experience, starting with the assessment and counseling of children and families, then moving into the workplace realm and serving on several governance and advisory boards. I came across Paula because she had written a couple of columns recently in the paper that I found quite provocative. And so I reached out to her and wanted her to chat with us all today about mental health. Ms. Allen, how are you? Welcome to our show.
I'm doing well, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. So tell me a little bit about mental health and COVID. Why is it something that you think is important, that we need to be mindful of?
Well, mental health is critically important in every situation, COVID or no COVID. It really is the driver of our quality of life, our work productivity, our relationships, virtually everything.
Right.
So if we don't focus on the things that are important, then they drift in a way that we might not like. And COVID really brought this home to all of us. We had a lot of things that the human mind doesn't like, and no surprise to anyone here, but it really significantly impacted the mental health of the population in a very negative way.
Is this what inspired you to launch something that you call the Mental Health Index?
Interestingly, a lot of people think that, but we actually made the decision to launch the Mental Health Index in 2017, before most of us would have even imagined a pandemic. And the reason is that you probably heard the term, you can't manage what you don't measure.
Yep.
And with everything that the mental health does, how important it is to individuals, how important it is in an employment situation to businesses, it seemed ludicrous, actually, that there wasn't a clear measure to help us understand where we are, what works, what doesn't work, and whether we're improving or not. So we made that decision, and we were working on the Mental Health Index 2017 through 2019, ready to roll in 2020. But we also had another thing ready to roll in 2020. So they really just launched coincident. It really just launched coincident to the pandemic.
And tell us, what do you think has happened to that index, both before COVID and then obviously with COVID-19?
So we had the benchmark information before COVID. So as we were developing, we're testing questions, we're making sure that we're refining, we're also collecting benchmark information. So we had a really good before view of the working population. And when we launched monthly in April of 2020, we saw a massive decline from the end of 2019 to April of 2000. I can't speak right now, April of 2020. And really what happened was we saw shifts on a significant scale. We saw a tripling of the portion of the working population that we consider high risk. So those are people who might not have a mental disorder at the moment, but are very high risk of such. We saw people who were in a vulnerable place move into full-on crisis. We saw simpler issues, things that could have been addressed, fairly directly, become much more complex because there was a lack of support and isolation. We saw increases in eating disorders. We saw a fourfold increase in risky drinking behavior, from 2% of the working population to 8%. So we really saw an exacerbation of a number of things, but we also saw those people who may not have been in crisis become much more sensitive to stress. We were under a lot of strain with change and uncertainty, and it really impacted almost everyone to either a greater or lesser extent.
How do you determine this index? Like, what parameters do you include in the index? And is it questions you ask people, or data that you can find, or what is it?
Yeah, well, we look at a number of aspects of mental health. Look at the things that really make a difference in predicting people's mental health and well-being. There's their experience of anxiety, depressive symptoms, isolation, their work productivity. There's a number of things. So we tested all of that and validated all of it. And the way we get the data from the index is we have a group of individuals. Our sample right now is 15,000 individuals globally, 3,000 of which are in Canada. And they represent, different ages, geographies, different demographics. We ask them every single month to answer certain questions relative to their mental health, as well as their experience, because we want to know not only just where they are, but why.
Fascinating. And how do you arrange these 3,000? Are they randomly selected?
No, not random. We selected them to be representative of the working population. So looking at really what comprises Canada in terms of a number of different demographic factors, and then we recruit based on that.
So this index obviously is changed and you say has decreased, so that you think Canadians who workplace mental health has declined dramatically with the advent of COVID-19. Did it flatten out? Did it get worse? Did it get better? What?
It declined, and we're seeing some improvement, but the improvement has nowhere near brought us back to the way we were. And a couple of things I want to point out. It is the workplace population. And I think it's important to sort of understand that, because people who are working, who, have held down jobs and move forward, they are vulnerable like everyone, but they tend to be a little healthier in all respect than
Really?
people who have never been able to work. So think of the entire population, and we all sometimes make an assumption that everybody is able to work, everybody has that full capacity, but not everybody does. So the working population generally is healthier. But what we saw was a massive decline.
Sorry, hold it. I apologize.
Yeah.
The working force population is healthier in mental health than everyone else, and yet what you saw was a dramatic decline in the workplace population's mental health. And so therefore, by extension, are you suggesting that everyone else is doing even worse?
It's quite possible. Absolutely. So when you think about it, somebody who is not, they have some sort of limitation, they've never been able to hold down a job, they're in a much more vulnerable state. So with the disruption that we saw in the pandemic, I would expect that group would have had a much more difficult time, and their mental health would have been even more significantly impacted. So I don't want us to forget those people, but I want us to also understand how significant this was, because the healthiest of the population was significantly impacted.
This is fascinating. Really interesting conversation we're having tonight with Paula Allen about mental health, particularly during COVID-19 and in the workplace. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with Paula Allen. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Paula Allen. Paula is an expert in mental health. And over the past few years, the mental health of Canadians has fluctuated due to social, economic, political events taking place across the country and around the world. This pandemic that we've all gone through, the financial crisis that we may be, going through, the war in Ukraine, changes in the labor market have really sparked stressors for everyone in the working population. Encouraging, I think, necessary awareness for all of us to further support all of us during these challenging times. Paula Allen started something called Lifeworks, a leading provider of digital and in-person total well-being solutions, and has continued to educate corporate Canada with something called the Mental Health Index for 28 consecutive months that we've just discussed. Paula Allen is a global leader in research and total well-being, and she's going to discuss today key trends, problems, and solutions surrounding Canada's mental health landscape. Paula, this general workplace well-being mental health trends that you talked about, that it's gotten worse. What is it? Is it just stress? Is it work from home? Is it having to take care of elderly patients, elderly parents? Is it having to educate kids when they're at home? Tell me, what is it you think that's caused this dramatic decline in mental health?
Well, all of the above are part of it, but really the core reason is when you look at what happened that changed our lives and our experiences between the end of 2019 and 2020, it's almost like a checklist of things that the human mind does not like. We do not like change. Even those of us, and I'm one of them, who say they like change and variety. We if you look at it, we like change that we control. We like change that is relatively predictable. We don't like ongoing, constant change, and even positive change. We can measure the stress in our bodies, like buying a house, having a child, all of that we experience as stressful. So we had a lot of change during the pandemic.
We sure did.
Oh, yeah, and ongoing as well. Like it never stabled. There were ups and downs and changes, like it was all over the place. So that definitely is a stressor. The other thing that the human mind does not like, and this is a big thing, is isolation. We are meant to be connected to other people. One of the things that helps us manage stress is just the sense of belonging with others, shared experiences, social support, being near another human being, having a hug from another human being. We're wired to need each other. And when we don't have that, if you even think about it anthropologically, being by yourself is very threatening. We're wired to respond to that as a threat, as fear. It is stressful. In your mind, you actually have parts of your brain that fire in the same way as if you are experiencing physical pain. So, we have a problem with isolation in this society anyway, which we can talk about if you wish.
Yeah.
But the pandemic really exacerbated that. And on top of that, we had risk, we had the unknown. So all of these things, it would have been impossible for us as human beings with human minds not to have been impacted. And then everything that you said, other things that happened, parents dealing with children and the disruption in schools, managers dealing with, is my business going to be successful and how do I manage in this difficult situation? There were many follow-on things that added to that.
But it seems like, we're not social distancing anymore. We're not masking anymore. We're going to concerts. We're going to sporting events. We're going to, I went to my first big convention a couple of weeks ago. So
Yeah.
even the convention business is back. Hotels are full. People are traveling, so much so that the airports are crammed. Is it all over and is mental health gone?
Well, your mind doesn't snap back immediately. Think about everything that I just said in terms of, the change, the uncertainty, and the fact that it changed our outlook, it changed our mental health. One of the definitions of a trauma is an event or a situation that actually changes your course, changes the way you behave, changes the way you look at the world. That is kind of what we experienced on a collective level. Again, some much more than others, but this in many circles is being described as a societal trauma. So if you
A
understand
societal trauma.
societal trauma,
Really?
yeah. Think of global scale, over 2 years in the making, high risk for those 2 years, uncertainty. We saw the behavioral change, we saw the psychological change. It actually fits the criteria. So when you think about it in that sense, when you go through anything that is traumatic, removal of the stimulus, removal of the thing that caused it doesn't mean your response immediately goes away.
I was chatting with someone that was one of the occupiers slash protesters in Ottawa with the Freedom Convoy, the trucker convoy, the trucker occupation, whatever it is you want to call it. And I asked them why they did it. And they said, you know what? It was terrible with COVID-19. We were trapped at home. We couldn't socialize. We couldn't do all these different things. And it was a great party. It was a lot of fun. You met a lot of people, made some great friends. It was almost as if he went through trauma and this was the outlet. Whether he actually agreed exactly with the policies or not, he just went there for the fun and the party to be free and open again.
Yeah. Well, again, reconnecting with other people, regardless of what the situation is always helpful. And again, if you want to look at it the other way, there's no mental health concern, there's no stress that is helped by being isolated. So having that connection with others is really important, but I actually want to get to a point in that as well. Even though we are able to move around more freely, to connect, there's a lot of travel. We looked in our index, and it's not exactly the way it was before. 2/3 of us are actually saying that we're now more comfortable with less contact with others. We didn't like it at the very beginning. It was traumatic for us, but we got used to it. So we haven't really gone back to the same social interaction that we had before. Not exactly the same way. It's much more than it was before, but it's certainly not the same. And the reason I want to point this out is because that actually is consistent with a pattern that we have been seeing that started well before the pandemic. We had a few years ago, the Surgeon General in the United States talk about our increased isolation as a society as a major health risk. The United Kingdom has a Minister of Loneliness, as does Japan, because it is such a major
Minister of Loneliness.
Minister of Loneliness, yeah.
Could have put us all on Match or Bumble or something.
Well, again, the way your mind works is that you need to have other people. Your mind fires in a different way when you're in contact with another person, when you feel that social support, when you feel that connection. And the absence of that increases both your mental health risk, but also is such a strain on you that it increases your physical health risk as well. So it is a public health issue, and we've been trending like this for quite a number of decades. The pandemic just accelerated that. So it's not surprised that, even though we went so far in an isolated direction because of, necessary mandates, we haven't actually bounced back in a way that one would have hoped, because we were already on a path to become more isolated. And if we're not more intentional about correcting that, then we'll continue down that negative path.
I had an interesting conversation with a professor at University of Toronto this past weekend. And he was saying that, students are coming back for the first time in 3 years into lecture halls with, hundreds, if not sometimes thousands of people, and labs with lots of people. And he said, they don't know how to interact anymore. They don't know how to socialize. We got to figure out a way to teach them how to socialize, because they've spent grade, 11 and 12 in virtual learning in some of the most formative years. And it's not just first years, it's like second and third years that, they didn't learn some of the stuff that they were supposed to learn in first and second year because they didn't have those kinds of things. And we've, I think, read lots of things about the challenges for young kids that, are kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, that may have been forced to. It was interesting. He said, look, think about what we did. We forced them to sit behind a video screen for 8 hours a day. And it was the worst TV you could ever imagine. It wasn't even good TV. It was bad TV that we were forcing them to. And he said the biggest challenge he had with his own kids, and here's a professor, he said the biggest kids is that they were really smart and they knew how to get the video game up and hide it from everyone else. So they were playing video games the whole time that they were on Zoom, supposedly with their math class or their whatever class. Let me ask you, since you're a workplace expert, what's the impact on people that are just starting out jobs? There are people that I actually had someone in my own company that left, and she had said that I was the only person that she had met in real life at the company, and she was here a year.
Yeah.
How do you think the impact is on the ability of them to form their network, their contacts, their mentors, and socialize into a company?
Yeah, it's a great point. And quite frankly, it is a very big deal. And I think it's wise to bring that to the awareness of employers. When you really think about it, your first job, let's say you're leaving school, you're going into your first full-time adult job, it's a big deal. Like it's a life stage change. And any kind of life stage change, you're more vulnerable because you really don't know exactly where you fit.
Yeah.
You're really kind of figuring yourself out. You're figuring out how you relate to other people. You have this high need for validation to make sure that you're on the right path. You have this high need for connection. So when you're just starting out in your career, and you really haven't established yourself yet, the level of stress when you don't have those kind of connections wraps around the world twice. When you think about that stage of life as well, this is the stage of life where many people meet life partners, and you don't have that, lifelong friends, and you might not have that to the same extent.
Yeah.
But just even that pat on the back, you're on the right path, you understand the culture, you feel like you're a part of something. If you don't have that, then you're really missing out, and it is a strain. So some people think of stress as, you have a problem and therefore you're gonna be stressed out about it. You can have a situation where you're not getting what you need, and that could be equally stressful.
Do you have any, top suggestions for business owners, for CEOs, for leaders in businesses on what they can do to really support good mental health?
Well, one of the silver linings of this pandemic is that many CEOs and many business leaders are asking that exact question. They want to make sure that they're supporting people's mental health in a way that I have not seen before. So, I think the first thing is to have that as an intention. And I really believe that is important, because I'm going to give you a list of things that you can do. But if your intention, if part of your business isn't built with the awareness that your people are important, and if they're not doing well, your business is not doing well, then you're going to make offside decisions that don't go in the right direction. So I think number one.
Well, number one is an intention.
Number one is an intention.
Okay.
Number two is making sure that you are very open about the fact that you do care about the well-being of your employees. That has been really quite impactful. Like when CEOs through the pandemic, and it doesn't have to be a pandemic, it could be a difficult business cycle, it could be anything. And show empathy on the impact of what's happening with your employees. That makes a difference. It makes people feel less isolated. I'm using that word again, in how they're feeling. It makes people feel that they matter, which makes a big difference. Showing gratitude for what your people are doing is important for them, and it's important actually for you, because you get in the right mindset. But all of that needs to be backed up with some investment. People have needs, and organizations, top organizations, have been very intentional about promoting services that will help people with those needs. So employee assistance programs, benefits programs, where individuals can get counseling, where they can get coaching on dealing with what might be going on with their children, where they can feel comfortable that their issues are going to be managed, whatever the severity, whatever the complexity, in a confidential way, because we can't do it all by ourselves. When you think of any health issue, you need that level of professional support. And I think organizations who really burst through the barriers of stigma and promote those services and make sure that people feel okay using them, their people will do a lot better.
This CEO of Goldman Sachs supposedly was quoted saying, you got to come back to work and work 40 hours a week in the office, or don't bother showing up at all. What do you think of that kind of an attitude?
I think that's an extreme. I think though, the whole work from home, work in the office thing, I think that'll settle down. I think some organizations will have more of an in-office culture. Other organizations will have more of a work from home culture, and there'll be all sorts of variations in between. I think the most important thing is, when you're thinking about how you communicate with people, it's not just a CEO and employees. There's a relationship there, just like a relationship between one person and another.
Yeah.
And if you communicate in a way that doesn't show empathy, doesn't show, that you're listening to what the other person is saying, doesn't show that you want to find a middle ground that works for everyone, then you're going to damage that relationship. And unfortunately, if you damage that relationship, people's well-being will suffer, but they'll also more likely walk.
We're chatting tonight with Paula Allen. She is the global leader and senior vice president of research and total well-being at Lifeworks. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with Paula Allen. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Paula Allen. She is the global leader and senior vice president of research at Total Wellbeing. We've been having an interesting conversation about mental health and the workplace, particularly given the stresses that we've all been under with COVID-19, with potential recessions, with the war in Ukraine. Gosh, it seems like every day we're confronted with something new. I want to tell you a little bit about Paula. Paula Allen is the global leader, research and total well-being, and a senior vice president, as I mentioned, at Lifeworks. In this role, she manages the research agenda for Lifeworks, which includes primary research, exploratory data science, research collaborations, and meta-analyses. What are meta-analyses?
Meta-analyses are when we actually look at a number of different studies and we look at the themes and patterns from those studies. So not just one study, but something very broad. So we're able to get a really good picture of what's going on with a particular issue. It's a fancy word, but it's a pretty practical way of doing research.
Thank you for explaining that. Paula is a member of the Women's College Hospital Board of Directors and chair of the, get this, Quality Academic and Equity Committee. What's the Quality Academic and Equity Committee?
Well, when you think about how a hospital and any organization functions, quality is important. Equity is important, and academics is important. And in a hospital setting in particular, they all reinforce each other. So we know about health equity, for example, making sure that we're meeting the needs of diverse groups has impact on your outcomes. So it impacts quality. We know, for example, that being able to translate research into practice also impacts quality. It also impacts your advancement. So there's three sort of things that reinforce each other: quality, equity, and academics.
You were also co-chair of Civic Action's Champions Council on Workplace Mental Health, and you were a member of the Income Security Working Group providing advice to the Ontario government on issues related to disability and income support. Tell me, what were the big findings of that task force, and were they implemented?
The
Income Security Working Group.
Income security, yeah. So we looked on people with different types of social assistance and made some recommendations around the support that they need in order to live quality, meaningful lives, and the income that would be required, and some of the unusual barriers to actually getting income, where you live, who you live with, and a number of things. So I was pretty proud of the recommendations that came from that task force. And I learned a little bit about how slow it can be to have those things implemented, but it's being looked at and implemented slowly over time.
You've got over 20 years of experience in this area. You've got an undergraduate degree from the University of Toronto in research psychology. You've got a graduate degree in something I've never heard about before called psychometry.
Yeah,
you've got an internship in neuropsychology. Tell me what psychometry and neuropsychology are, please.
Yeah, well, psychometrics is really, it's how you measure things. Because I mean, there's a theme through my life, understanding things very well and in a very objective way. And measurement, assessment really helps us understand. And the area that I focused on at that point in my life was children. So did a lot of assessment with children with learning differences, children with behavioral differences, really to help understand what their strengths are. So sometimes we look at the surface and we only say, oh, this is not the way I expect. But we don't actually look at the person in an in-depth sort of way. So our assessments helped us look at people in a holistic way, understand what their strengths are, and create situations where those strengths could help them be as successful and as happy as possible in their lives.
Fascinating. So maybe you could tell me a little bit now, if you could, about what you think businesses need to do, not just for their employees, but for their leaders, because I think if it's stressful for the workforce, it's got to be also stressful for the leaders, for the management of companies, and how they're going to be dealing with the challenges of all these issues that we've been talking about: COVID-19, war in Ukraine, inflation, recession, etc.
And we know that for a fact, actually. When we looked at our mental health index, we saw something quite astonishing. right at the very beginning of pandemic and throughout most of it, the mental health scores of leaders were actually lower than that of non-leaders.
Really? That's fascinating.
Yeah, it is actually very fascinating because it's not what one would have expected. Prior to the pandemic, because leaders tend to be a little bit older, they hone as part of their role good problem solving skills. They might have access and knowledge of resources. Their mental health tends to be a little bit better, but we saw the opposite. And when you think about it, it's because, leaders are people too. They were experiencing all of the change, the upheaval, and everything that impacted everybody. But they also had the care and influence on others. They needed to be able to support their people. They needed to be able to make decisions around how the business needs to function and survive. They were dealing with a public that was very anxious and sometimes not very nice. So the leaders had other levels of concern. So across the board, we saw this as a phenomenon. And we looked at it even more deeply. We did another study with over and above our mental health index with Deloitte, in collaboration with Deloitte, and looked at senior leaders. These are people who are 1 to 2 levels under the CEO. So your most senior leaders in some of Canada's biggest corporations. And we were found that they were suffering even more. The level of strain that they were under, but also the lack of empathy that society gave to this group was quite heartbreaking. They felt more stigmatized if they had, if anybody were to know that they were struggling, because they were feeling that, people say, well, you have money, you have a nanny, you have this, that, and the other, what do you have to worry about? And all that does is helps remind us that we don't really know how the human mind works. And these people were really suffering because of that.
That's fascinating. That it would be even more so for those people in those sort of senior roles. What about different industries? Was it different in different industries?
It was actually, accommodation, food service, the industries that were hardest hit, the industries where there was a lot of financial vulnerability, that really showed itself in our index, and also the correlation between financial well-being and mental health. We also saw some industries where there wasn't a financial issue, they didn't shut down, but there was a lot of volatility. There was a lot of demand. And if you remember at the beginning of the pandemic, when things crashed, think about what it would be like from a financial point of view. Things crash from a financial point of view. Think about what it would be like if you're a financial advisor. Think about what it would be like if you're a teller in a bank. I mean, just dealing with the angst of the public in some roles, and the ups and downs of the public, the toilet paper shortage in the grocery stores. I mean, that sort of impacted people's stress and well-being when they were having to deal with that in their industries as well.
Well, I worked on Wall Street in the summer of 1987. And in the fall of 1987 was something called Black Monday, which was one of the largest declines in the stock market. And a guy that I had done a deal with during the summertime threw himself out of a window and committed suicide. So, obviously some stress is too much stress, and people can't deal with it. So, it's stressful, even if you're a well-paid, high-paid investment banker on Wall Street.
And if you feel as well, because of whatever reason, that you can't reach out for help, that's one of the factors that leads to that outcome. When people get support early, when they get care early, when they don't feel that sense of isolation because of their mental health, then we don't have this sort of fatal outcome, which is unfortunately so common when you have mental health, when you have a mental health issue.
What changes have companies put in to deal with all this, and that you would see as positive?
Well, I think that companies are much more aware of the range of issues that people are dealing with. And, our numbers and just even the conversations that they have help organizations realize that, mental health isn't just about supporting the people who might be off work on disability leave, for example, because they have a mental health issue. There are people coming to work every single day doing their job, smiling in meetings, and suffering a lot. So the support that the organization can provide in terms of a continuum of resources. So, crisis resources, things that'll help deal with stress, but also things that'll help people with longer term mental health issues. That's really come to the forefront. And the other thing that organizations are realizing, and this is one of the recommendations that I would have for organizations, is how important it is to train their managers. So we found that 4 out of 5 managers had been dealing with a mental health issue of an employee over the pandemic, whether the employee came to them or whether they observed something that they felt was concerning. And most didn't know what to do. So that puts stress on the manager, that puts stress on the employee, because they often, were segregated. Like, if people don't know what to do, they tend to do nothing, avoid interaction, and that's not good.
Right.
We really just needed to help managers feel comfortable on how they could step in and not be counselors, but show their employees that they care about them as human beings and help human beings and take them to the next step, which is maybe a referral to an employee assistance program. So that training has been really, really, really critical.
It's interesting. There's a line, I'm not sure if you'd agree with it or not, but that people don't quit companies, they quit bosses. And so I think that employers have got a big role, and maybe that's why those second and third level managers, leaders felt all the stress. But employers, managers, leaders have a big role in this. I found on the internet that you spoke at a conference, and you said things like bad communication, harassment, and conflict have been identified as key factors in absenteeism.
Mm-hmm.
Bad communication, harassment, I understand, and conflict. Is there actually a lot of that in the workplace?
There can be in different workplaces, some more than others. And you mentioned bad communication, and communication can really kind of support people. When they understand things, your stress goes down. When they feel connected, your stress goes down. When the opposite happens, your stress goes up. So if communication is double-barreled and unclear, if communication is sparse and questions are not answered, if tones are harsh and don't help people feel like they matter, it's just really a chore to communicate with them, then that's going to impact people's well-being. Think about, I think if you ever get really confused about something with respect to mental health, think about children and what they need, right? Children need connection. They need to feel like they're valued. They need to be heard. They need some structure, some variety, a lot of things. And sometimes we forget that we need the exact same things as human beings. So on the point as adults, so on the point of communication, how parents and how teachers communicate with their children and the children that are in their care make a difference in how those children see themselves. And I think it's the same for employees.
So employers have to be as empathetic and as caring and as mentorship oriented as good teachers need to be.
I think we have to be as attuned as teachers and parents. The communication doesn't need to be exactly the same because there's more of an equal relationship when you have adults, but being empathetic, showing that you care about another human being, listening, being clear, putting yourself in that other person's place, that is never going to put you in a bad place. That is never going to go wrong.
We're speaking tonight with Paula Allen. She is the Global Leader Research and Total Well-Being and a Senior Vice President at a company called Lifeworks. And we've been chatting about COVID-19. We've been chatting about mental health. We've been chatting about the challenges that we all have had over the course of the last couple of years and how we can deal with it, I guess, and more importantly, for Paula's work, how companies can assist in ensuring that we all have positive mental health. We're going to take a final break and come back with some concluding comments with Paula Allen in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Paula Allen. She's the Global Leader, Research and Total Wellbeing, and a Senior Vice President at Lifeworks, which was formerly called Marneau Chappelle. She manages the research agenda for Lifeworks, primary research, data science, research collaboration, and something called meta-analyses, which I was interested to learn what it was all about. We've been talking primarily about COVID-19 and the impact of COVID-19 on mental health, but also the war in Ukraine, inflation, recessions, all the other things that we're all subjected to, and primarily what managers, what leaders should be doing, what employers should be doing to assist in employees dealing with mental health issues. Paula, you were saying that you might want to rephrase your answer to my question about the Goldman Sachs CEO and whether you had to come back to work 40 hours a week, and whether hybrid workforces would continue in the future, or whether we'd all be forced to come back to work. What do you think?
It's not a matter of so much about rephrasing, but I think there was one point that I missed before. People rarely do and say things that they believe will be harmful or damaging or mean or whatever. They have reasons. And I think the main thing to remember is that when you are communicating with people, you have reasons, but they have reasons as well. So the whole idea of just making sure that there is that kind of two-way dialogue, that there is empathy in how you're communicating, that is a standard about how anybody would function in a workplace, as well as any other relationship.
Okay. Look forward. Be visionary for a second, if you could. And we've had a lot of attention on mental health. You're obviously completely focused on that in your occupation, and clearly in a lot of the speaking and other things that you do. We've got these mental health talk days that we've all become more aware of. Mental health is an issue that I think is something we're far more aware of today than we ever have been in the past. Where do you think it's going in the future? Where's workplace well-being going to be 5-10 years from now?
It'll be much more ingrained in a pillar of business success. I think what we've learned is how important it is. We have more now than ever in society a people-powered economy. People have access to technology across the board, access to logistics, a whole bunch of things that are really leveling the playing field. But what makes a difference in organizations is the innovation that their people can bring to the table, the collaboration that they have to get things done efficiently, their customer service. All of these things are impacted by people's well-being, and their mental well-being in particular. So it makes business sense to make sure that we're not only supporting the people who have any sort of vulnerability or any sort of need. I think that's absolute table stakes. But beyond that, we create healthy workplace cultures so people can be their best. There is even this movement in ESG investing, and environment, social, and governance investing, to really look more closely at how employees and employers are interrelating and the support that employers are giving. So health, safety, employee well-being is part of that investment view. It's part of the S of ESG, and certainly is becoming more prominent. So I do think it'll become more of a business imperative to do the right thing.
I think this has been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate it. I think your comments on isolation and how it really is a risk, and something that we need to be very mindful of are critically important, because I think that we made some mistakes in COVID-19. I think we isolated some of our seniors when we tried to protect them. I think that we should have used the words physical distancing rather than social distancing when we wanted people to stay apart. I think, when we closed some of the parking lots and parks so that people couldn't get out and exercise and exercise with other people, I think we made some mistakes. So I think that, and I read this article on the weekend in the Sunday New York Times that talked about something like 50 or 60% of 10-year-olds can't read because they've spent the last 2 years just on video, and so they've got a real problem with reading and reciting simple stories. So I think we made some mistakes, and I think it comes down to lots of the things that you've talked about. But one of the main ones is isolation, and we allowed people to be too isolated. And I think, as you stated, human beings need interaction. They need socialization. They need to be with other people.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate that it took something like a pandemic for us to really pay attention to that in the way that we should. You know, academics and health professionals have known how damaging isolation is for quite some time. And, you know, we did the best that we could with the information that we had. It was a scary time and people were dying. But we have to learn from everything. And what we've learned is that we can get thrown off balance very easily in terms of our mental health and well-being. And one of the things that helps us maintain balance, one of the things that we need, one of the things that is essential to our well-being as human beings, is other people. So how we connect and how we maintain connections and how we actually feel that sense of inclusion and belonging and create environments where others can feel that. That is so critical to the health of our society that, again, if there is anything that came out of the pandemic that's good, I hope we're a little bit wiser in that respect.
It's probably important to the health of our society. It's probably important to the health of our families and our relationships. And frankly, probably important to the health and well-being of companies, if you create that kind of connectivity.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, that's our show for tonight. Thanks for joining us. My guest has been Paula Allen, who is the Global Leader Research and Total Well-Being and a Senior Vice President at Lifeworks. I think it's been an interesting conversation. We've talked about how mental health has been a real challenge during COVID-19, how it's increased dramatically, how it's been felt by everybody. But Paula has indicated that actually is the people that sort of at the top levels of some companies have felt it even more, and some industries that have felt it even more. And I think we need to be mindful of that. And we've talked a lot about communication. We've talked a lot about connections. We talked a lot about how isolation is bad.